Today we're going to talk about functions in Python. In the past, we called functions, already existing functions, like the int function to change things to an integer, and various other functions. However, today we're going to define functions. We're going to define our own function, and that's a really important part of Python. And we're going to start with a very simple function. And as you can see, uh, we have a keyword def, which is kind of short for define, hi. So what we did here was we set up a very simple function called hi, and this function is not going to have any parameters. And as we get further into this process of defining functions, we're going to start to make some more complex functions. But right now, we're going to keep it very simple, and we're going to create a very simple function without any parameters associated with it. And to define a function, we use the def reserved word, and then we get a function name. And in the case of this function, we're going to call it hi. And like I said, this is going to be a very small function, very simple. In real life, you have more complex functions. You're going to probably want to have it do maybe some math, maybe some accounting, or some of that sort. But we just want some really simple function. So within our function, and you notice how there's an indent, just kind of like we would with a for or any other block of code. We have an indent, and it defines the block of code in the function. To call the function, you can see I just put hi. I was going to ask us to save it. But basically, to call a function, you just use whatever name you called it. In this case, we have a function called hi, which prints out hi. So if we were to want to call it again, we could put hi again. And basically, what's occurring there is we're calling the hi function 3 times. Once again, a simple function. We're going to maybe add to this, and we're just going to ask it to print something more. And as we get into this, we could do some more complex functions. We're having it now say, hi, my name is Ed. Oops. What's off here? Oh, you can see that it's not in purple. Idle identified that as unknown word. Python is case sensitive, and when I put a capital P in there, it said, "Uh-oh, no, this is no good. Your whole statement is wrong, because it doesn't know what what a capital PRNT is." Okay, so now we got this going. It says, hi, my name is Ed. We run it, and basically it goes through and hits that 3 times. So once again, this is about as simple as you can get. We have no parameters, and we learn about parameters here in a little bit. They're when you pass a value to the function to work with, and like I said, we're gonna get into that soon. This is just a very simple function. It gets hit, it calls that section of code. And so once this function is defined, and let's say you have an enormous program, you could have it anywhere in that code. Whenever we call the function hi, it's going to print hi, my name Ed. So let's get it a little more complex. I mean, that's really simple. We're just having it print something. This time, let's pass a parameter, and we're going to set this parameter up, and we're going to call it the num is the parameter that we're going to pass. And we will call this function +2, because when we're done with this function, we want this function to be able to, given any number, add 2 to it, to return basically the given number +2. So if we were to give it 10, it would return 12. So what we're doing in there, we're defining new num within the function, and we're going to say new num equals the num, the parameter, +2. And a very important keyword in function is return. And when you add return in there, it passes that that value out of the function. In the case of the more simple function, we were just doing print every time it hit. This time, we're going to use it to pass a value, kind of the round function. When we call that, it can round off to the decimal point we want. This function, given a number, when we're done with it, would just give that number +2 back as the return. So now that we have the function defined, we're gonna assign a new variable, and we're just gonna call it final num. And what we're gonna want to do is we're gonna want to use our own function, our +2 function, in final num, and we're gonna pass it a parameter, and we're going to use a_num as the parameter to pass our new function. Now you don't have to pass it, already assigned variable. You could put a literal in there. We could just put, if we wanted to, 7 in there, or 8, or whatever number we want to give it. But we're having it, we're going to pass it an actual function we have. And in the end, we're going to print it out. And now we still have the first part on there. But if you look down, we can see that it got the number we passed it, which is 7. We added 2 to it, and now we're printing 9. This is not quite a complex function like the function round, but what we did, we made a very simplistic function. This can be really useful for more complex things that you encounter in the business world. We're just adding 2 to it. But if you had whatever company you may be working for had like a complex algorithm for a calculation, maybe 30 or 40 lines of code, you would put it in a function and call it just like we did there, rather than every time you need to do that calculation have that same 30 lines of code in the program. And that's one of the huge things that you get out of functions in code. They're reusable. And you could have, would get into modules later. You could set up a module with maybe 10 functions in it, and if you import that module, then you can use all your functions. So functions are a huge part of making things better in Python. And see how we passed the literal there of 14 and it went to 16. So what we have created is our own function that we could call at any point after the function has been defined, and it will grab whatever we pass in the parameter. Like the 14 goes into the num, which then we use to add 2 to. We set a variable new num locally within in the function, and then we return it. So very useful. Functions are a extremely useful way to stop having to repeat large sections of code or small sections of code. You could also use it for tidiness. And we see in a bit that we don't necessarily have to stop this at just one parameter. We could have multiple parameters there. So if we were to do another function, maybe a more complex function, we could add multiple parameters. So let's make another function, and let's use some of this. Copy that down there and use some of the original function to make our new function. And this function, I want to call it add num. So we want to pass two parameters, being two numbers, and we're going to have the function add those two numbers back together. And so we're going to have number 7 and 11, at least for our first time through there. And we're gonna name this just add num. So we're defining add num, and currently you can see it has the num listed. So we have one parameter listed, and we're going to need to increase the number of parameters. Maybe do a little renaming, trying to make things make things easier to read. So we have the num1 and the num2, and that should do it with two numbers. And now we're going to have to, instead of adding 2 to it, we're just going to add basically add both of the parameters together to get a result, which would be num number 1, the number 1 plus number 2, and then we're going to return it. Now when we call our function, we're going to have to do it a little differently. We go add num, let's get our function there, because now it is looking for two parameters. So we're gonna pass it two parameters, and we're gonna do let's copy this down here. We're gonna put this variable, the first one, in there, and we put a comma to separate the parameters, and then the second one. So this function, given this, should assign into the final num, which we're going to print out, a value of 7 plus 11, which should be 18. And once again, if we wanted to, we could have just passed the literals in there. We could put 7, comma 11. But we're just gonna pass it these variables instead of that. And basically each of these parameters, you can see when we call it, lines up with the actual the retrieving parameters within the function. And in the end, we're going to return the number, which is the sum of the num1 plus the num2. The return is very useful. You got to make sure you do return the proper variable. And if we run that, we can now see that we get 18. We had the 16 there from the previous print, but you can see that it did indeed add the numbers together. So